So today I want to talk about something that happened 3 days ago that should be front page news everywhere, but is barely being covered. Saudi Arabia just announced that it will begin accepting yuan for oil payments from China. And simultaneously, the United Arab Emirates confirmed it is opening yuan clearinghouses in Abu Dhabi. These are not minor policy adjustments. These are the death certificate of the petrodollar system. And what comes next, what happens when the petrodollar dies, will reshape your economic reality in ways most people cannot yet imagine. Let me explain exactly what just happened and why it matters so profoundly. For those who do not fully understand what the petrodollar system is, let me walk you through it, because this is the foundation of American economic power for the past 50 years. In 1974, the United States made an agreement with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia would price all of its oil exports in US dollars and would invest its oil revenues back into US Treasury bonds. In exchange, America would provide military protection to Saudi Arabia and guarantee the survival of the Saudi regime. This arrangement created a permanent global demand for US dollars. Every nation that needed oil, which is every industrialized nation on Earth, had to hold US dollars to buy that oil. This meant that central banks around the world had to maintain dollar reserves. It meant that international trade was conducted primarily in dollars. It meant that the US dollar became the unquestioned global reserve currency. And this gave America an extraordinary privilege. America could print dollars, and the rest of the world had to accept them because they needed those dollars to buy energy. Think about what this actually means in practice. If you are Japan or Germany or South Korea, you have to export goods to earn dollars so you can buy oil. You accumulate dollars. And what do you do with those dollars? You buy US Treasury bonds. You lend that money back to America. This creates a system where America can borrow essentially unlimited amounts of money at very low interest rates because there is permanent global demand for dollar-denominated assets. This is how America finances its $39 trillion in debt. This is how America spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. This is how American consumers can buy cheap imported goods and maintain high living standards. All of it depends on the petrodollar system creating permanent global demand for US dollars. And now that system is dying. So what does it mean that Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil? It means that China no longer needs to hold US dollars to buy Saudi oil. China can pay in its own currency. This breaks the fundamental mechanism of the petrodollar. If the world's largest oil importer, which is China, and the world's largest oil exporter, which is Saudi Arabia, are conducting energy trade in yuan instead of dollars, then what happens to global dollar demand? It declines. And when demand for dollars declines, everything that depends on that demand becomes unstable. Now let me be very clear about what I am saying. The petrodollar is not dying overnight. This is not a sudden collapse. This is a slow structural erosion, but the process has now reached a point where it is irreversible. Let me explain why. For decades, Saudi Arabia refused to even consider pricing oil in anything other than dollars. The US-Saudi relationship was absolute. Saudi Arabia was completely dependent on American military protection, and America used that dependence to enforce dollar exclusivity. But something fundamental has changed. America's ability to provide security guarantees is now in question. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed for weeks. American military power has not been able to reopen it. Saudi oil infrastructure has been struck by Iranian missiles. American air defenses did not stop them. Saudi Arabia is asking itself a very logical question. If America cannot protect our oil infrastructure, if America cannot keep the shipping lanes open, if America cannot defeat Iran decisively, then what is American protection actually worth? And while Saudi Arabia is asking this question, China is offering an alternative. China is saying you do not need American military protection. You can have Chinese investment. You can have Chinese infrastructure projects. You can have Chinese technology. You can have guaranteed Chinese demand for your oil. And we will pay you in yuan, which you can use to buy Chinese goods, Chinese construction services, Chinese everything. Saudi Arabia is making a calculation. And that calculation is that the Chinese offer is now more valuable than the American offer. This is a tectonic shift. And once it begins, it accelerates. Because if Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan, why would the UAE not do the same? Why would Kuwait not do the same? Why would Iraq not do the same? Every petrostate in the Gulf is making the same calculation. And they are all arriving at the same conclusion. Diversify away from exclusive dollar dependence. Accept multiple currencies. Build relationships with multiple great powers. Do not put all your eggs in the American basket. Now let me walk you through what happens next. What are the concrete consequences of the petrodollar's death? First, the US dollar loses value. Not catastrophically, not overnight, but steadily and irreversibly. When global demand for dollars declines, the exchange rate adjusts. The dollar weakens against other major currencies. What does this mean for ordinary Americans? It means imports become more expensive. Your iPhone costs more. Your gasoline costs more. Your clothing costs more. Your food costs more because much of it is imported or depends on imported inputs. Second, US interest rates rise. Remember, the petrodollar system creates automatic demand for US Treasury bonds because oil exporting nations recycle their dollar revenues into US debt. When that recycling stops, when Saudi Arabia is earning yuan instead of dollars, Saudi Arabia is not buying US Treasury bonds anymore. So who is buying them? The US government still needs to borrow. The debt is still growing, but demand is declining. And when demand declines, prices fall. And when bond prices fall, interest rates rise. What does this mean for ordinary Americans? It means mortgages become more expensive. Car loans become more expensive. Credit card debt becomes more expensive. The US government's own borrowing costs increase, which means less money for everything else. Infrastructure, healthcare, education, all of it gets squeezed because more of the federal budget goes to debt service. Third, America's ability to finance its military declines. The US military budget is over $800 billion per year. That is sustainable only because America can borrow cheaply. But if borrowing costs rise, if the government has to pay higher interest rates, then either the military budget has to shrink or other parts of the budget have to be cut even more drastically. Either way, American military power projection becomes more expensive and more difficult to sustain. Fourth, American geopolitical influence declines. For decades, America could use access to dollar-based financial systems as a weapon. America could sanction countries by cutting them off from SWIFT, the dollar-based international payment system. America could freeze assets denominated in dollars. America could force compliance by threatening financial exclusion. But if major economies are now trading in yuan, in rubles, in other currencies, then American financial sanctions become less effective. America loses one of its most powerful geopolitical tools. Fifth, and this is perhaps most important, the entire global economic structure shifts. For 50 years, the world economy has been organized around dollar centrality. Trade flows, investment flows, debt structures, all optimized for a dollar-based system. When the dollar is no longer central, when it is just one currency among several, the entire structure has to reorganize. Supply chains shift. Trade agreements change. Financial markets restructure. This is not a minor adjustment. This is a fundamental reordering of how the global economy operates. Now let me talk about who wins and who loses in this transition. The biggest winner is China. China has been preparing for this moment for 20 years. China has been building alternative financial infrastructure. The yuan clearinghouses, the cross-border interbank payment system, which is China's alternative to SWIFT, the Belt and Road Initiative, which creates yuan-denominated trade and investment across Eurasia and Africa, the digital yuan, which could eventually bypass Western financial systems entirely. All of this was designed for exactly this moment. When the petrodollar dies, China is ready with a replacement system, and that gives China enormous geopolitical leverage. The second winner is Russia. Russia has been cut off from dollar-based systems because of Western sanctions. Russia has been forced to trade in rubles, in yuan, in anything except dollars. And now that exclusion looks like foresight. Russia is already operating in the post-dollar world. Russia has the relationships, the infrastructure, the experience. When other nations need to figure out how to trade without dollars, Russia can show them how. The biggest loser is obviously the United States. America loses its exorbitant privilege. America can no longer borrow unlimited amounts at low rates. America can no longer print money and have the world absorb it. America has to live within its means for the first time in 50 years. And American means are constrained by $39 trillion in debt. The adjustment will be painful. Living standards will decline. Government services will shrink. American global influence will contract. But there are other losers too. Europe is in a very difficult position. Europe has been free riding on the dollar system for decades. European trade is conducted in dollars. European central banks hold dollar reserves. European energy imports are priced in dollars. When the dollar system weakens, Europe has to adjust too. But Europe does not have an alternative ready. The euro is not strong enough to replace the dollar. Europe is caught between a declining American system and rising Chinese alternative, and Europe does not have the economic or military power to chart its own course independently. Japan and South Korea are also vulnerable. Both nations have built their economic models around exporting to Western markets and importing energy from the Gulf, all denominated in dollars. When that system changes, when trade flows reorganize around yuan or multiple currencies, Japan and South Korea have to rebuild relationships, renegotiate terms, restructure supply chains. Both nations are wealthy enough to manage this transition, but it will be expensive and disruptive. Now let me address something that many people ask me. Is there anything America can do to stop this? Can America reverse the death of the petrodollar? The short answer is no. The process is too far advanced. Too many nations have diversified. Too many alternative systems are operational. Too much damage has been done to American credibility. That combination is not achievable, which means the petrodollar's death is inevitable. The only question is how fast it happens. And here is where I want to talk directly to you. What does this mean for your personal economic decisions? First, if you hold significant dollar-denominated savings, consider diversifying, not abandoning dollars completely, but holding some assets in other currencies or real assets like property that maintain value regardless of currency fluctuations. Second, if you have debt denominated in dollars, especially variable rate debt, understand that interest rates are likely to rise. Pay down high-interest debt now while rates are relatively low. Third, if your income depends on international trade or dollar-based systems, start thinking about how your industry will adapt to a multipolar currency world. Subscribe for more analysis of the petrodollar's collapse and what it means for the global economy explained in simple terms. And tell me in the comments, do you think America can manage this transition successfully? Or are we heading for economic crisis? I will see you next time. Let me leave you with one final thought. The petrodollar's death is not the end of the world. It is the end of a particular world. The world where American economic dominance was unquestioned. The world where dollars were the only currency that mattered. That world is ending. A new world is emerging. And the nations that adapt fastest to that new reality will be the ones that thrive.